Nobody is giving Tennessee praise this offseason. Nobody is hyping up Tennessee to be a CFP team in 2025. And quite frankly, it's just wrong. I'll tell you why. That and so much more. It's your Wednesday Locked On Vols.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, good Wednesday morning, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Vols. I'm your host, Eric Kane. Appreciate you guys for being here and starting your Wednesday off with me and the show here on Locked On Vols. We're a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every single day. And couldn't do this show without our friends, our everydayers. And a couple more questions that I didn't get to yesterday that I do want to spend some time on in segment 2. Josh Ward coming up in segment number 3. But the topic here to get going on a Wednesday, and I'm not going to lie, I saw Locked On Auburn host Zach Blackerby, who's over the college channel here at Locked On, the podcast network, and he did this topic, and I'm like, you know what, that's a really, really good topic here in the month of February. So I wanted to bring it over here to Locked On Vols because I do think there's some big-time truth to this, and essentially, is Tennessee being disrespected this offseason simply because they didn't make a lot of external moves? So many things. I mean, we've done it here on this show the last couple of weeks, right? The month of January and February. It's the offseason. We're a football podcast, okay? So we spend, week after week after week in the offseason evaluating, okay, what can this team do? What can this team do? What about this player? What about this player? And so many of those projections and or conversations stem from offseason rankings list. Top 10 coaches in college football, top 10 coaches in the SEC, top 10 quarterbacks in college football, so on and so forth, right? Top 10 under the radar teams heading into the season. I mean, there's a list for everything, and it's good because it's topical and conversational here for the show. We can discuss it and everything, but we value teams. We place importance on teams based off these rankings, and I'm as guilty as anybody. Okay. But I'm kind of bringing all this here because, ESPN's not high on Tennessee, on 3 in some of the rankings and whatever outlets out there that you have, CBS Sports, whatever it is, never mentions Tennessee in these, best offseason rankings or transfer portal rankings or recruiting rankings, and even though Tennessee had a top 10 class, simply because what Tennessee's strategy was this offseason, I don't think it was necessarily they set out to just do this, but I mean, it was kind of status quo, and that sounds bad, and let me show my work here. You always want to continue climbing and getting better and better. You never want to be complacent, okay? And I'm not saying that Tennessee's complacent. I surely do not believe Tennessee's complacent, but a massive, massive part of the offseason in 2025, 2026, moving on into college football, okay, is you've got to essentially retain your roster year in and year out. Okay. Sure, you have transfer portal additions that you want to seek out. You have guys in the traditional recruiting classes that you want to sign, and you want to help improve your team. Don't get me wrong. But if you have a player that has a good season, okay, you got to work to keep that player on said roster. If you have a coach that did a very, very good job coaching his specific position group or his specific side of the football, if you're a coordinator, you have got to work to keep said coordinator on your roster. So sometimes I think the status quo gets a bad rap. Tennessee's offseason has not been sexy, okay? Tennessee's offseason last year was kind of sexy. You went out and got Chris Braslin, went out and got Jermon McCoy, got some new toys to play with, and that was awesome. Miles Kitselman, these guys turned out to be really good players for Tennessee. We'll see, jury's still out on Chris Braslin, I recognize that, but those were all important moves, and I'm not saying that Tennessee shouldn't have went out and got some new toys, because they could certainly use some in some places. And maybe that's still to come, depending on spring practice. But what Tennessee did to make a difference this offseason was you kept Nico Iamaleava on your roster. I don't think that he was ever leaving, but there were some discussions there. Of course, end of the year discussions and all that. Again, I'm not saying he was leaving to go to the transfer portal, but there was at least speculation on fans' parts. But Nico Iamaleava is your quarterback, and he's on your roster, okay? We know about Boo Carter and his flirtation with the transfer portal, and Tennessee got a new deal done with him, and he is on your roster. Mike Matthews, was he going to go in? Was he not going to go in? He was rumored. We talk about this several times, for over a week, it felt like, about going in the transfer portal. But Tennessee was able to retain Mike Matthews. Where would you be right now if you didn't have your quarterback? Number one, that is a separate podcast conversation in its own right. Where would you be if you didn't have your quarterback? Where would you be if you didn't have your presumed wide receiver one? And trust me, I know Mike Matthews has got a whole lot to prove, but you're better with Mike Matthews on this roster, given all the turnover and everything and the change of the position group, than you are without him. That is for dang sure. Where would you be without Boo Carter, who, those two guys were my pick to break out in 2025. Boo Carter already an all-SEC freshman recipient in 2024. Where would you be without those guys? Not only those guys, but, Jermon McCoy and Ricky Gibson, they had really, really good years. When you have good years, okay, you've got to work and make sure those guys, hey, you good? We good here? What do you need? Okay, let's stay on this roster. Let's stay on this path moving forward. That's just the nature of college football, and it's no different at Tennessee than it is at Alabama, than it is at Georgia, than it is at LSU, Ohio State, Notre Dame. I mean, that is the business of college football right now. So Jermon McCoy, and I'm not saying these guys were ever flirting with the transfer portal. That is not what I'm saying. But Jermon McCoy's obviously coming back. Ricky Gibson is obviously coming back. Bryson Easton's coming back. Dominic Bailey's coming back. Those two guys could have left for the NFL draft. Bryson Easton certainly, but he elected to come back to Tennessee and play yet another year of eligibility. DeSean Bishop, who was a former walk-on, who was a role player for Tennessee, a backup running back. You don't think that he has enough tape now and he has enough eyeballs on him to where he could go and look for a better opportunity to get more carries at somewhere else? Absolutely. But DeSean Bishop was taking care of this offseason and said, hey, man, we value you. We like what you bring to the table. We like what your dynamic is to our running back room. We're going to take care of you. We want you here on this team. And DeSean Bishop, a lot of these guys tweeted out, hey, new Vol Club deal, returning to campus. Jeremiah Thielander did the same thing. Arian Carter is another one of those guys, right? I mean, a lot of Tennessee fans want to complain about Tennessee's linebackers not playing well in space, and sure, you got to be better in that regard, but you are a linebacker. You stop the run first. You're an in-the-box player. Linebackers in space, that is not the strong suit, right? You got to work to be better at that. I get it, but my point is Arian Carter's a pretty good player, and I think if he makes a couple of adjustments and continues to evolve, he's going to be a really, really great player. But Arian Carter is back on your team. So you work to retain your roster. Let's look at the coaching staff. Sure, we'll see eventually what Josh Heupel does with filling the void left behind by Mike Eckler, okay? I would assume, okay, this has been the working theory now for a couple of weeks, and I would be, at this point, very surprised if it didn't happen this way. But we presume that Tennessee will promote Coach Chop, okay, and he's going to be, coaching the outside linebackers and continuing to help with the defensive linemen and continuing to be Tennessee's lead recruiter, and then bringing in an outside help for the special teams coordinator role, if you will. Because, again, remember, there's no cap of on-the-field coaches moving forward, okay? There's just a cap of how many of your coaches can go on the road recruiting. And I got news for you guys. The last two off seasons, Chop's been on the road recruiting, and somebody's not been out there. During the season, Chop is out there recruiting when coordinators are not out there. And so if it eventually happens this way, and some fans might say, well, what's the difference? What's the value in promoting Chop if he's just going to continue to do the same thing that he's been doing the last couple of years? Well, the reason you do that is to retain him, to keep him. Because, again, you keep him, you promote him, give him a little bit of a raise so you don't lose him. He has been Tennessee's best recruiter. He's been Tennessee's lead recruiter, and he's been coaching the Leos for a while now. So you want to keep him. And again, nothing's official yet, but I would assume that is the strategy and the path that Josh Heupel will go. Again, we'll see what happens. But if that were to happen and Chop is promoted, that's why. That's why. But I mean, that's not sexy, is it? But that's so important. In fact, that would be arguably the most important move of the offseason if it is to transpire, holding on to Chop. Because not only does he coach your outside linebackers, your Leos, he is your lead recruiter and does a fantastic job. Evan Crabtree is an analyst that helps out with special teams. He had a huge hand in what Mike Eckler's done the last couple of years. Evan Crabtree, I would assume, even if they go out and get another special teams coach, that if he retains if he retains as a support staff member, that's big because again, he's already been working to the success that the Tennessee special teams have had the last couple of years. I think that's big, and nobody will even talk about that if that's the case, and all that. We'll see again how Josh Heupel wants to fill these voids. Tim Banks, there was never any serious conversations this offseason like there were last year. I mean, Tim Banks and MTSU, a lot of people thought that deal was going to happen where he was going to go to MTSU and be the head coach. It didn't. But there were some rumors out there. Clemson was looking for a defensive coordinator. Miami was looking for a defensive coordinator. Penn State. There was a couple of other ones as well. And Tim Banks' name was always floated in there, maybe by his agent, but nonetheless, Tim Banks' name was floated all around there. Now, I recognize a lot of Tennessee fans don't like Tim Banks, and I get it. Georgia game, Ohio State game, you got to play your best ball. But boy, oh boy, isn't it good that you have a Broyles Award finalist, meaning a guy that was a finalist for the top assistant coach in the country, retained and coming back for a defense that was number 6 in the country in total defense. Yeah, that's pretty good. That is very good. A defense that was, so it was number 6 in total defense. The defense was also number 7 in scoring defense. It was number 9 in rush defense. It was one of the top teams in the country in third down defense, 6th in third down defense. I mean, again, we can go on and on and on. That's big, but it's not sexy because nothing's changed. So, sure, I'm not going to sit here and say Tennessee shouldn't have went out and got another wide receiver in the transfer portal. Brought in Amari Jefferson. We'll see what happens. Sure, I know Tennessee missed out on, they got 2 offensive linemen via the portal, which was good, but they missed out on 1 or 2 that they might have liked more. Jermon McCoy's injury, when's he going to return? Will it be ready for the start of the season? I don't know. It probably would behoove Tennessee to go get a cornerback. I recognize all that. But the disrespect, it almost feels like that nobody's talking about Tennessee. Nobody's really factoring Tennessee to be a contender next year after, keeping a Nico and a Boot Carter and a Mike Matthews and a Jermon McCoy, Ricky Gibson, Bryson Eason, Arian Carter, DeSean Bishop, Tim Banks. We'll see if it ends up being what I think it's going to be. And, Coach Chop is retained on this roster. Like, all those moves are huge. They're just not sexy. And so I think that's a big reason why it's almost disrespectful to Tennessee in terms of these offseason rankings. But again, offseason rankings are just that. It's a talking point for people like you and me to talk over at the bar over some drinks. So I don't know. I thought that was really, really interesting. Sure, Tennessee missed out on some guys that they probably should have, worked hard to bring to campus for whatever reason. But Tennessee did a very good job retaining its roster. You lost some players like Squirrel White and all that. You lost, Jalen Smith. You lost, there's several other players in the transfer portal, but for the most part, did a very good job at retaining your team that just went to the college football playoff. Your team that just had an SEC player of the year. I know he's gone now, but your team that won 10 games. That's not nothing. Anyway, that's kind of my spiel. That's kind of my rant here on a Wednesday show. Would love to hear from you. Is Tennessee being disrespected by members of the national media for simply getting the job done this offseason? Because then in years past, that's not a story, but now that is very much a story in 2025. Would love to hear from you at _Caner and at Locked On Vols. Hey, when we come back, should Nico Iamaleava have been starting in 2023? It's a question I didn't get to on yesterday's Mailbag show, but we're going to talk about it right here on a Wednesday, Locked On Vols. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. Now, Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. An expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back guaranteed, all while you go about your day. No stressing, no worrying, no waiting, okay? This is what taxes should be all about. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service real-time updates. Only available in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantee. Got a really good mailbag question, a later submission, so I didn't get to it before I recorded yesterday's show. But this is from Tyler, and I thought I'd bring it on the show here and we can kind of discuss it for a couple of minutes. Did UT miss the boat on starting Nico too late? Can't help but wonder how much better the offense could have been in 2024 if he were to have started all of 2023. I bet the house we beat Arkansas at least. That leads to a better playoff seed, maybe a win. Nico could have probably won 8 or 9 games in 2023. Sorry, Joe. Interesting. Yeah, sure. Like if Nico would have played in 2023, yeah, he would have been farther along in 2024. And close losses like on the road to Arkansas, I'm with you, man. That's you're in better position to win that game. Was he fantastic that game? No, not to my recollection. Did he run out of bounds with the football in his hands to end that football game? Yeah, it's very frustrating. About the lowest IQ play I've ever seen. Joe Milton did it a couple years ago. Very, very frustrating. Learning experience for him, obviously, but very, very frustrating at the time. But I'm not going to sit here and say that Tennessee messed up by not playing Nico from game one. I mean, you're talking about a true freshman who was still very, very raw, who still, I know he looks skinny as a rail right now, but he's put on a lot of weight since that moment. So he still wasn't physically kind of where they wanted him to be. Mentally processing the offense, processing the speed of the game and all that. I don't think that he was ready to roll right from the get-go. Now, we can have a conversation midway through the year, but then you look at midway through the year, the Alabama game, I want to say the Kentucky game. I have to go back and look and check everything. But, I mean, Joe Milton was playing his best football for Tennessee at that point in time. And so it's like, well, does it necessarily make sense to make a move now? And then, I mean, Joe Milton was your starting quarterback all year long up until the bowl game, and then that's when Nico took over. So it's tough. We live in a world where we want to see, the now. And Tyler, I know you're not, banging the drum on that and everything. But I do think that we often forget about the progression and the development that's needed. David Sanders, very interesting case, right? Like I expect him to be Tennessee's starting right tackle, simply because talent level, he's better than anybody in the room. But will he, quote unquote, be ready to roll where you want him to be game one? Probably not. You have to learn on the fly. And from a strength standpoint, we've talked about this. He's going to be much, much, much better week 6, 7 than he is week 1, 2, 3. So I'm intrigued to kind of see how that evolution is. But then you're sitting here saying, well, if you think David Sanders is going to start from day one, why didn't Nico start from day one? Well, look at the tackle situation for Tennessee. There's not another viable option where you can just say without a shadow of a doubt, oh, Tennessee will be fine with that guy. I mean, Joe Milton was. Sure, Joe Milton wasn't winning any Heismans or anything, but Tennessee had a great security blanket with Joe Milton. So could Nico have won 8 or 9 games in 2023? I don't know. We'll see. Would he have been further along and in position to potentially win some more games in 2024? Sure. I agree with that. Would Nico have starting all of 2023 made a difference in the college football playoff game against Ohio State? No. Would it have made a difference in the second half against Georgia? I don't know. First half was pretty good. Or first quarter was pretty good. I don't know. That's interesting. Could it have made a difference against Arkansas? I think so. I think you're right. And to your point, you have another win on the schedule. You're 11-1 in the regular season, and you're not the 9 seed or whatever you were. So, yeah, we can play this game all day long, but I'm not sure what Tennessee's record would have been in 2023 if Nico Iamaleava was your starter from day one. I don't know. Would you have won 8 games? Would you have won 7 games? I don't know. It's fun to talk about, something to think about. So, Tyler, I appreciate you bringing that onto the show. I do want to share a couple more here. This is from Brent. Next week's Twitter Tuesday question, we're going to do it now. Do you trust this year's men's or women's basketball teams to go further in the NCAA tournament? Good question. Lady Vols, hot right now. Everybody likes watching them. It's brand new, excitement brought to the game, and they have life, and they're a good ball club. And I think what Kim Caldwell's doing has been fantastic so far. And so I'm excited to see what they do, and I think they can make a little bit of a run. Now, what does the Lady Vols do elite? Is there anything elite that the Lady Vols do right now? They do a lot of things good, and this is not to try to trash them or devalue with the season that they're having. But what do the Lady Vols do that's considered elite? I don't know. The men's team plays elite defense. Now, not in the first half against Vanderbilt, not defending the three-pointer against Kentucky in 2 games. I recognize there's been some lapses, but Tennessee has spent weeks upon weeks upon weeks at points in times, not this week, I don't think, but they've been the number 1 ranked defense in the country. And so because they play at an elite level, I trust Tennessee to go farther than I do the Lady Vols right now. Now, having said all that, basketball, it is what it is, man. It's all about who's playing hot at the right time, who's hot in that specific game, the matchup. That's why the March Madness, they call it March Madness. Tennessee could be bouncing the first weekend of the tournament. Tennessee could go to the Elite Eight again. I mean, the in-between wouldn't shock me, in my opinion. But because Tennessee basketball and the men's team do something at an elite level, I do trust them a little bit more. Maybe that's a boring answer, but that is my answer. Appreciate that. And then we'll go to Jared. Assuming it's a little baseball question. Assuming Liam Doyle and Marcus Phillips work out, but Nate Snead doesn't, do you think Sundays should turn into a committee outings, or should there be a bona fide starter that likely gives you 5+ innings? I know it's early. LOL. Liam Doyle, Friday night starter. Marcus Phillips, Saturday night starter. Nate Snead, Sunday night starter on opening weekend. I still think all that is very much a work in progress. We know Liam Doyle is going to be a starting pitcher Friday nights. Marcus Phillips looked good. I wouldn't say that he was superb in his start. Nate Snead struggled a couple of times, worked out of some jams. He certainly was not his best, but he wasn't bad. Hofstra's also really, really bad. So I expect those guys to get another go of it, this weekend coming up against Sanford. And then we'll see what happens. Brandon Arvidsson, who got the midweek start, abbreviated, it's a midweek game, but did get the start on Tuesday. And I think he's a guy that can start for Tennessee potentially. Tegan Coons is a guy that I think can start for Tennessee as a true freshman. So I think it's very much going to be a work in progress. But to your point, Sundays I could see if it turns into that and they want to put Snead back in the bullpen, which I think is eventually what's going to happen because that's where he's better, and piggyback roles, long relief, or stopper. I do think it's kind of by committee until you figure it out, right? Like start Brandon Arvidsson, piggyback him with Nate Snead. Start Tegan Coons, piggyback him with Nate Snead. Do what you did with Xander last year until Xander took over. Now, I'm not saying that any of those guys are going to take over and end the year like Xander Seacrest did for Tennessee baseball last year, what legends are made of. Co-host of the Porch Podcast, by the way. If you didn't check out last week's episode with Xander, go check it out. Got Charlie Taylor coming up tomorrow. Looking forward to that on the Porch Podcast. Shameless plug. But you can kind of treat it that way until somebody does take over. So, and I think that's what Tennessee's going to do. You got a lot of time before SEC plays, and just because SEC play starts doesn't mean that you're like, okay, well, we got to roll with this, this, and this. You can still kind of figure some things out, especially on the mound as you work through conference play. But certainly, the defensive positioning will likely, in years past it has been, likely be set by the time the SEC season gets here. So good question there, Jared. We'll have to see how it all comes together. I, for one, am looking forward to it. All right. Appreciate you guys always for sending in questions. Tuesdays usually when we do it on the show, but wanted to bring a couple of stragglers here on the Wednesday show. Josh Ward, I'm going to ask him about Tennessee basketball. Should fans be worried, encouraged, or just annoyed at the fact that Tennessee seems to be turning it on in the second half after digging themselves in first half holes? And what's he make of this Big Ten SEC discussion for expansion of the college football playoff? All that's coming up as we continue on here with this Wednesday Locked On Vols. Josh Ward, it wasn't easy. In fact, Tennessee had to really dig itself out of a huge hole in the first half, down 16 points. But Tennessee did climb out of that hole, take down Vanderbilt for a win on Saturday. No midweek game this week. Huge game coming up this weekend at A&M. Overall thoughts on kind of where Tennessee basketball is and how they avoided what could have been a really bad week and losses to Kentucky and Vanderbilt.
Right, going 0-2 would have been bad. That would have been a big hit at Tennessee's chance to get a number 1 seed, or at least remain in the position it's in right now as the top 2 seed projected going in. Now going to Texas A&M, another projected number 2 seed. This is a big opportunity for Tennessee. A win at Texas A&M would really enhance Tennessee's resume. It would keep Tennessee in the running for a number 1 seed. If Tennessee can win at Texas A&M, that also means it will have played a good basketball game. Tennessee's not going to go to College Station, play poorly, and win the game, realistically, because even if Tennessee struggles offensively, it's going to take high-level defense to slow down Wade Taylor and what Texas A&M can do. So big week coming up, a full week to get ready for Texas A&M in the final stretch. We have 3 weekends to go here in the regular season.
If you're a Tennessee fan, would you feel encouraged? Would you feel a little bit better about the way Tennessee's kind of rallied in these second halves here lately? And I know it came up short against Kentucky, but got the win against Missouri, got the win over Vanderbilt, strong second half. That should give you a vote of confidence. Or are you more frustrated and thinking like, well, why don't you put yourself in a hole to begin with in the first half? Like, where's the emotion meter at right now?
Well, during the first 20 minutes of that game, it would have been very easy to get frustrated as a Tennessee fan watching that game. I'm sure just about every fan was. Understandably so. I'm sure Rick Barnes was frustrated there on the bench. So there's nothing wrong with that. I am a little confused by the fear or just the overwhelming anxiety that I appear to find from so many fans about the NCAA tournament, because that's what we come back to pretty much every time is, okay, what does this mean for what Tennessee can do in the NCAA tournament? Yes, Tennessee could get bounced early. Yes, Tennessee could fall short of its goals, but that applies to everybody. Look around college basketball. There's a reason that Tennessee is still number 5 or number 6 in the country, whether you look at the net rankings or the polls. Tennessee is in a very good position, a better position than most. Tennessee will have an advantage going into the NCAA tournament. So I'm kind of steering your question in a different direction, but I think that's what it ends up being about is how do you feel about March? And I think having seen Tennessee go to the Elite Eight last year, and Dalton Connect's not on this team, I recognize that. But it's still a really good team that is the best offensive team in the country and will have an advantage in trying to get to at least the Sweet 16 and probably the Elite Eight. I think that should make fans feel good while recognizing there's some things that Tennessee has to do to be able to get there, but that applies to everybody in college hoops.
Really cool stat. I'm sure you saw it over the weekend after the game on Saturday. Per John Rothstein, Tennessee 16-1 when Chaz Lanier scores 16 or more points. When he doesn't, Tennessee falls to 4-5. Clearly, I mean, he's not Dalton Knecht, and anybody thinking that he was going to be Dalton Knecht, I think that was unfair expectations. But you know, he remains the X factor. You know, for me, for Tennessee. Sure, Zakai Ziegler's got to be on. Igor's an intriguing X factor candidate because I think when Igor plays well, Tennessee's just so much more diverse and so versatile. Jordan Gainey's another good one. But I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, Chaz Lanier was brought here to shoot and score. Mm-hmm. And when he scores, Tennessee typically has a good record. And would you agree with that? He's probably the biggest X factor for Tennessee. If you want to continue to play deep into March, I mean, everybody's got to make shots, but Chaz Lanier can't have some of these MIA games.
Yeah, everybody that's in the rotation has a role. Chaz Lanier's biggest role is to go score points for Tennessee, to take and hit shots, and a lot of times hit shots from the outside, but also be aggressive. Rick Barnes, I think, was happy with the stat production, scoring 21 points. I'm sure grabbing 8 rebounds, but it was the way that Chaz Lanier played in the win against Vanderbilt that had Rick Barnes so happy. And that's been a push all season long. Be aggressive. Go take your shots. Get to your spots. And Chaz did that this past Saturday. He had a bad game at Rupp Arena. He shot 0 for 7 from 3. Nobody is going to say that he played a good game that day or that night. But that doesn't change how important he is, and that's been backed up by his success this season. I've seen so much talk about, well, in the big games or against quality opponents, he doesn't show up. Yes, it's harder against good teams. That's going to be the case, and we'll see what he does in the postseason. But it's funny. We had on our show on Josh and Swain several messages talking about what a disappointment he's been, some calling him a bust. And Eric, I thought that was insane.
No.
By Friday, the Naismith top 30 players in the country list came out. Chaz was on it. He's an all-SEC player. He's the leading scorer on a top 5 to top 10 team in the country. So, yes, he's had his disappointing games. He came to Tennessee from North Florida and has had a terrific season and has put up big-time points against power conference teams. He's averaging a big number against the highest level of competition this season. So, yeah, I think Chaz Lanier is probably the X factor. If we're going to talk about what the offense is able to do, Chaz is going to have to provide offense in the postseason. The numbers back that up.
Josh, let's shift gears here for the next couple of minutes. You have athletic directors and key personnel and members of the SEC and the Big Ten and meeting this week in New Orleans, and I think the ACC met last week, and the Big 12 and some group of 5 are supposed to be in this conversation, essentially discussing the future of the CFP, the College Football Playoff. And the SEC and the Big Ten have control over this because they threatened to leave before the last cycle. But when this thing re-ups, not in 2025, but when this thing re-ups, the SEC reportedly from SI's Ross Dellinger, really good piece out there, and encourage everyone to go check it out. We talked about it on the show yesterday. He's saying, hey, the SEC and the Big Ten won 4 automatic qualifiers. Okay, the playoffs can expand either 14 or 16. What do you make of that? Is 14 to 16 okay? Is it too much? Is the SEC and the Big Ten being too greedy, asking for 4 automatic qualifiers? Where are you at on that?
Well, I kind of go step by step with it. If they do expand to 14 or 16, which appears to be likely and is kind of my expectation has been for the last couple of years, then I don't think the 4 automatic qualifying spots is that big of a deal, because it would be very rare that the SEC would have less than 4 teams in a position from a ranking standpoint to get into a 14 or 16 team playoff. They would have had 4 in this past year. If they went to 16, then we would have been talking about 5 or 6 SEC teams that would have been in. So the 4 automatic spots, that's really just securing the positions that they're almost guaranteed in the first place. Now, am I in favor of going from 12 to 14 or 16? No. I think 12 is plenty. I think in a lot of cases it's more than enough. I'm happy to get the football. If they go to 14 or 16 teams and there are more games to watch and talk about, obviously I will do that. But I'm not sure how that's enhancing the playoff. If Alabama and Miami had made the playoff this past season, would that have made the playoff better? I don't really think so. Again, there would have been more games to discuss, but would that have made the playoff better? Were either one of those teams real championship contenders? No. Not at all, in my opinion. If they went to 16 teams and we're adding Ole Miss and South Carolina in it, the field is deeper. It is perhaps more competitive in the early rounds. I don't think that really enhances the playoff. I don't think anything about this is for the fans. I'm not really sure that it's for the players. I suppose you could make the case, well, if more teams get in, more players get to go compete in the college football playoff, yes. But is that really what they need? I don't. At some point, you have to be let down. If you can't get in, you don't get in. So I think this is about people who already make a ton of money finding a way to make even more money. And I don't know how any of these type decisions that we're seeing being made really push the sport forward in a better way.
Yeah, I think this year in many ways is an outlier in terms of the first round games. Because, you mentioned a moment ago, like if you expand it, maybe it makes the early round games more competitive. And I think many would agree with that. But then again, I do think this year's an outlier. 4 first round games, 4 blowouts. That typically that's not going to happen year in and year out. But nonetheless, last question: what part of that story was more intriguing about what could happen down the line? It's a trickle down effect, right? It's a 9-game SEC schedule. Do you have that Power 4 component in your non-conference slate, all that and more? Do you like the Big Ten SEC challenge, maybe at the beginning of the year, to where maybe the SEC doesn't go to a 9-game conference slate, but you have to play a Big Ten team to kick off your year? I think that's kind of interesting. Or, my favorite, do away with the SEC championship game, but have a play-in game. Have a play-in game the first weekend of December. Because, this year would have been a blast, right? Everybody and their mother would be watching that across the country. I think I think the play-in game would be super, super unique, because at that point, you want to hold on to the money if you're Sankey in the conference, but there's no point in having a championship game at this point, right?
I think you're probably right. And I think it's pretty obvious that there is less interest than we've ever seen in the conference championships. And the fact that the conference champions went into the playoff and immediately got knocked out probably devalued it even more. We'll still get good games. I don't mean to be all doom and gloom. I'm still going to look forward to the college football season. And if we can get better regular season matchups, I think you know where I stand, Eric, on the non-conference games against low-level FBS or certainly FCS teams. They're brutal. They are awful to watch. And to be there in person, the fan experience, you get to go watch your team put up a bunch of points. That's fine. But for Tennessee, when we look at the home schedule, it often has way too many cupcake non-competitive games.
Would you equate that to the defending national champion baseball teams putting up 46 to outscoring Hofstra this past weekend 46-2 and 3 run rule 7-inning games? Yeah,
that's not for me. Yeah. And I should point that out. That's not my thing. So if we can get better regular season games, if we can see more power conference, and really it's the power 2. You have power 4, but you have a more powerful 2 and a less powerful 2 in the SEC and Big Ten versus the Big 12 and the ACC. So if we can get better games, and the Big Ten is going to continue to strengthen, I really believe, with the money they have and what they've done recently, they'll recruit better. So, and maybe not as deep as the SEC, 1 through whatever it ends up being, but the top 6 to 8 teams will be very competitive, I think. So that part of it, I think, can be really good. Creating games that matter is important for the sport, because too often ADs and coaches are trying to find games that don't matter to puff puff up their record. So let's play some games that matter. And if you can get those automatic qualifying spots, maybe schools will be more willing to do that.
Keep you over a few minutes. Apologies there, but what do you and what do you and Joshua? What do you and Jason Swain have coming up the rest of the week on the show? 9 to noon, 99.1 The Sports Animal. Noon to 3. I'm all over the place. Noon to 3, 99.1 The Sports Animal.
Yeah, VFL's back-to-back. So Eric Haynes, shout out to him and Brian Rice from 9 to noon. But 12 to 3, Monday through Friday, we're talking Tennessee football, looking ahead to 2025, the season. That's already begun. But a lot of hoops. Ron Slay on Tuesdays. You can always go back and podcast that if you miss it live. We had to move some things around this week because he was traveling, so available to podcast if you like. And we have our newsletter on Fridays. It's free. Thanks to everybody that has subscribed already. Would love for you to do that. Eric provides a link, joshandswain.com, if you want to sign up.
Josh, as always, man, appreciate it. We'll talk next week.
Yeah, thanks, Eric.
Josh Ward, 99.1 The Sports Animal. All right, fun show here today on a Wednesday. Appreciate you guys for being here, making Locked On Vols your first listen, your first watch each and every single day. Big thanks, as always, to Josh Ward for stopping by the show. We do it every single Wednesday right here on Locked On Vols. We'll continue looking ahead to Tennessee in 2025, talking Tennessee basketball and whatever else is happening in the world of Tennessee athletics, SEC football, and more. This is Locked On Vols.